Hello everybody and welcome to a very special Nordea webinar. This one is called Cyber Weather Forecast for the holiday season, How to Avoid Cybercrime. And we're very lucky to have Benjamin Särkkä run the webinar for us today. Now, Benjamin is a professional hacker and he works at Nordea as a cyber whisperer. And he's a well-known personality in the professional hacking world. He's appeared on Finnish TV and organizes one of the largest hacking conferences in the Nordics. And basically, Benjamin makes security assessments of different companies and tries to highlight the vulnerabilities and any issues that they might have in their defense systems. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Benjamin. But before I do, just to say that if you have any questions, please write them in the chat and we'll try to take them either as we go along, if there's a suitable point, or at the end. So enjoy the webinar and over to you, Benjamin.
Thank you and good morning from my part as well. I hope you're having a wonderful time and the weather is as good as it is here in Finland. Yeah, like Chris mentioned, I wear a lot of hats. One of them is trying to explain or bridge the gap between the technical aspects of cybersecurity and the business context, I suppose, of why that matters and how it matters. I'm hoping I'll be able to give all of you some valid information and some food for thought about how to think about cybersecurity and how to prepare for the coming holiday season. And if there's any questions or anything's unclear, just write it in the chat and I'll see if we can fit it in to during the presentation. We'll start with a small poll. So I'm hoping most of you have heard about disinformation, and this is the first time you're looking at it, but I'm wondering, or we're wondering, how many of you have actually seen disinformation on social media or been maybe influenced is the wrong word, but been confronted with clear attempts at influencing your decision making or your thinking behind specific subjects. I think we're going to leave the poll open for a few minutes. Did we get some results for it? Yes, so most people have. That's 76%, no, 73. If I'm that can't be right. 76% yes and 27% no. It's an interesting number. Anyway, I'm hoping you see the presentation again. The reason I'm asking is that social media and disinformation is widely being utilized for multiple things right now. And one of the main reasons or one of the main things with disinformation is deception. And a lot of cybersecurity presentations start with this slide because it's cool to quote old philosophers, but it's also somewhat relevant in terms of thinking about how you do your security posture in a company. It's from Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and the essence is essentially that all warfare is based on deception. Having a good deception policy in place from an attacker's point of view is crucial to be able to get the victims or the users to do things that are outside of their own self-interest. Using deception to hide your techniques or to hide your motives is routinely used on the attacker side, and it's something that we encounter in our daily jobs quite a bit, all the way from phishing emails to social engineering attempts to even malicious insiders who are acting in a way that is not beneficial for the company itself. Now, what I hope you will get away from this is that we can use deception on the defensive side as well, essentially changing the dynamic, changing the economics of attacks to benefit the defenders. So moving away from only the attackers trying to deceive us towards moving towards a defendable position where we're trying to deceive the attackers. But before we get to that point, let's start with some background, some history. Without understanding where we came from, it's really hard to understand where we are. And I'm not going to summarize everything that's happened in the previous 40, 50 years of cybersecurity or IT security, but I figured it's a good start to look at what happened in the previous 10 years or so. So in 2012, we pretty much got confirmation that there is no privacy on the internet. With Edward Snowden and a number of other leaks, it became abundantly clear that we have large nation-state groups that are actively gathering all of the information that they can about us. If you look at the Salt Lake City or Utah's Salt Lake City data center that the NSA has for just storing data, it's estimated that they have a minimum of 15 years of all correspondence of all data that goes through the US. Now, not all of that is unencrypted, but they still maintain the metadata for that information. That essentially means that if any of us use any American services, which most of us do on a daily basis, just out of social media and Google, any sort of websites that use ADNs or ad delivery networks, and the data that is being gathered is stored for 15 years. So if at some point down the line we end up with enough red flags for one reason or another, they can look at what we did for the last 15 years and start trying to decrypt that. Speaking of decryption, during 2016, we started observing, and when I talk about we, I mean the security community and security researchers. We started observing this widespread campaigning to get master keys installed on encryption schemes. Now, we are quite heavily trying to counteract this, so that we can make sure that we don't end up with master keys to your communication. In Nordea, that would be fatal. We would not want at any point in time that anybody can read the correspondence or the traffic that is going between us and our customers. But even worse, we don't want that for society as a whole. Any sort of master key, any sort of backdoor to any system will eventually be exploited. And if you look at the TSA keys, like people who used to travel before the COVID thing might remember this TSA keys that you have on your luggage. And the luggage essentially has this master key that can be used for when you're bypassing TSA security control, that can be bypassed to use the locking mechanism on the luggage. Now, at some point during, I think it was end of 2016 or beginning of 2017, somebody took a picture of these keys and posted it on Twitter. One of the TSA employees going, "Look at what we have." Or maybe it was a cover of a magazine, like the way something around the way TSA is doing security screenings, and that led to some entrepreneurial security researchers 3D printing all of these keys for their own benefit, and then starting to test them against all of this luggage. These days, the 3D files or the printable files are easily findable online, and anybody can get access to anybody's luggage because of a picture that leaked. So backdoors and master keys are not a good idea to introduce into digital communications. We have leaks and fake news. We have attempts at influence elections now. The Macron campaign in France during 2018, I think 2017, realized that at some point somebody will try to compromise their correspondence, essentially their emails, as well as their important files. And once they started seeing the phishing campaigns hitting their employees or their volunteers, they hired a few people to start invalidating the data set. What they did is they found these phishing campaigns that were gathering usernames and passwords. And then the people they hired to invalidate the dataset just started filling in false usernames and passwords to the point that they peppered the entire dataset that was able to be leaked or that was able to be utilized as a weapon against them with false information. Now, obviously, for the campaign itself, this wasn't a problem because they knew what was real and what wasn't. But for the criminals who didn't have that insight into this, they had a completely useless data set, regardless of if they were able to gain access to it or not. And then when the emails eventually leaked, it became abundantly clear to all the journalists that were looking at it that it was a completely bogus set. So even if there was something of value, even if there was something that could have backfired on the campaign, that was masked by some of the information clearly being false. So they realized this deception or this active countermeasure as a defensive mechanism and lowered the amount of resources they needed to actually protect the data set by making sure that only the real people had access to the real data. Now, I'm gonna quickly just jump over machine learning and IoT because those will or almost require their own webinar, if you will. And focus a bit more on phishing and social engineering, as well as data loss and cloud abuse. Now, data loss and data loss prevention are things that are getting bigger, are quite large. I'm assuming that most of the audience have received some level of phishing emails. Some of you might even have received some level of what's called a CEO scam or a CFO scam, where the attackers are essentially just sending an email with a sense of urgency stating that if you don't quickly send me this money, then we will lose a very specific deal. I need this to buy a company, pay off a bill, whatever. Essentially, again, lowering the cost of attack and relying on human error. Cloud abuse is a somewhat new problem. When we're moving towards setup with containers and virtual machines and subdomains and like quickly moving marketing campaigns, we are now in a position where we need to protect a number of assets that we don't have full control of. Now, if you look at subdomain takeovers, for example, if a company has marketing campaign dot full company, and maybe this is easier to explain if I say in terms of Nordea. So let's say Nordea has this marketing campaign, and the domain for the marketing campaign is marketing.nordea.com, and then somewhere down the line we stop the marketing campaign, but we forget that this record exists somewhere because it's a subdomain. It doesn't cost us anything to like administer or upkeep. And an attacker notices this and manages to either get the IP address that the subdomain is pointing to because of the elastic IPs that exist on Amazon, Azure, or Microsoft, or get access or get a possibility to register the subdomain itself. They can use that subdomain trust relationship to do valid credentials for the top level domain. So in this case, they would utilize valid credentials for Nordea.com by having a subdomain takeover of marketing.nordea.com. That might sound really technical, and I don't mean to scare you with technical jargon or try to make this really hard to understand. I'm more trying to explain that the speed at which the things we need to understand to protect are moving are hard to keep up. Like even for us in the security industry, even for us that work with this on a daily basis, it's really hard to keep up with all the new techniques, all the new tactics that the attackers are using to take over these things. And that leads me very neatly into my next point. During 2020, we observed this new type of threat, or maybe that's not new, but still, suddenly most IT companies were working predominantly from remote. We introduced a new critical failure point into our systems. If the VPN goes down and we don't have access to any of our data or any of our tools, we suddenly stop working. But not only us, the entire company is now reliant on having reliable internet connections and reliable VPN connections. Additionally, we realized that the business continuity plans that we have didn't really account for people that are in positions where a single individual sits behind critical decisions or sits in front of critical information for the company, and suddenly people can become ill and they can disappear for a significant amount of time, and all of those decisions, all of that data, all of that information disappears from the company, essentially crippling those specific functions. For smaller companies, this might be even worse. If one doesn't even have the opportunity to have the possibility of having additional people or training additional people for the same services, then this becomes almost impossible to maintain. With that being said, suddenly business continuity wasn't or isn't a paper in somebody's desk anymore. It actually is something that we need to look at in some very real and very critical risk terms. Now, which services can we lose to be able to maintain our business? Which people are critical that we can't allow them to interact with other people? Who are we reliant on for specific decisions, or who is the only person that has access to specific systems? And how can we make those or add redundancy to those services so that we can keep working even if something really bad happens down the line? So we've moved quite a bit, even in the previous 10 years. And then, wait, what happened? Somehow I managed to pause my presentation. Yeah, and then even with all of that said, this year and in the days leading up to this presentation, I've been following what's been going on in the US on Twitter and social media. I've been following these bots that are amplifying these messages of hate and amplifying these messages of despair for people, essentially sowing discord into the environment, sowing these really hateful things. It started with the Reopen campaign, or Reopen America, in a month and a half ago or so, that was facilitated by this marketing agency or advertising agency from Florida. and they used a technique called astroturfing, where they opened up these social media websites or social media groups and started pretending to be this grassroots organization for like civil uprising against the oppression of having to socially distance from other people. Then the George Floyd thing happened, and people, let's call them far right, nut jobs, is probably the most politically correct way of expressing it, started using these fake accounts to promote violence for the other side. So essentially, these fascists started tweeting as anti-fascists and promoting violence against themselves to prove to their ranks and their media that there's this like violent clash going to happen. Now, not all of it is planned. Not all of it is like strategized, if you will, but a lot of the information that is available, and a lot of it is masked. It's like deceptively utilized for specific ends. And then the bots, the automated accounts, are being used to amplify the message of those like few voices that are making the situation worse. It's not necessarily about making a specific message heard, as it is about making sure that everybody is so angry at each other that they can't come to a like proper discussion, or they can't have a proper discourse. Who is behind it all is not something I feel super comfortable speculating about, but I mean, if you think about the motivations, I'm sure you can find some fairly easy culprits that could benefit from this civil unrest, especially leading up to the November elections over there. So we're in this weird place right now where like politics, geopolitics, deception, and technology is starting to meet in a way where some of the tools that were meant to be used for like bringing people together are used in a way that like pushes people further apart. We're in a world where even the word hacker isn't like immediately bringing these scary images of people. Oh, I think I know what this is happening. I need to keep moving my mouse so my screen doesn't go to sleep. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the hackers are being painted in this picture of like bad guys that will for sure make sure the world ends, while what I'm seeing from my vantage point is the hackers are trying to actively counteract all of these forces, all of these like nation states and criminal gangs and organized crime from like dropping the world into this ball of chaos, essentially. And it's not only about technology. A lot of the problems are humans and human interactions and the issues that we have with trust. And we already had the poll about whether or not you've seen disinformation. I think some of you might even have had these COVID-related phishing campaigns hit you, where whatever criminal gang is working and actively exploiting the theme that is valid right now. I keep asked, or my team keeps getting asked, so like, has COVID impacted the way criminal groups are doing their business? Is this like, is there a clear change? And I mean, the equipment is the same. The lures are different. It's any criminal group, any active organization that is doing this type of target campaigns, this type of attacks, are actively utilizing whatever themes are like on top. So whether it be Olympics or COVID-19 or an election, they're going to piggyback on what's current and what's up to date, and then utilize that. In these cases, it's COVID-19, and here's a fairly recent one from end of May, where we were actually targeted by a specific phishing campaign that is significant for a number of reasons. But one of them is that this is one of those things that it looks like a fairly non-malicious thing to begin with. It looks like it should be a real email or a real thing. They were targeting our users who are utilizing Office 365. They were sending it from spoofed emails. So it looked like it was coming from sort of the right person. And then it looked like it might be something that we might be doing or working on. Now, if you click the link or open the link, you ended up on a phishing site that tried to download a piece of malware, or a piece of a downloader component of malware, a stager component, if you will. And that essentially then tried to download the rest of the functionality. Fortunately for us, our security team is monitoring for these type of things, and when we noticed that we were being targeted, we stopped access to the phishing site, we stopped the binaries from being downloaded, and we didn't end up infected by whatever they were trying to infect us with. But when the attackers noticed that we are paying attention to what they're doing, and suddenly the traffic stopped towards their site, they removed all of their attacking infrastructure. They essentially noticed that we noticed, and because we noticed, they wanted to make sure that we get no information about how they're doing the things they're doing. This scares me a bit, because it shows that attackers are being more and more careful about not being caught and about having all the relevant information available to them. But it also gives me hope, because in terms of malware distribution, it appears, based on the data breach investigative report from 2019, that 94% of all malware, or of the way companies get infected, is through email. And then they utilize Office documents or Office macros to make sure that it remains, or that they can get the malware to run. And to me, that means that if we can solve email and we can solve Office documents, we've solved the most of the problem, or at least made it really, really hard for the attackers to do something about it. And I think that's a key takeaway from this presentation. If you can figure out how to protect yourself from threats that are related to email and Office documentations, you're well on your way to having a much more secure environment. The other thing that we briefly touched upon is the human error. Why is this like pausing all the time? It's the weirdest thing. Yeah. So this is a good example. I don't want to badmouth Deloitte, because Deloitte isn't necessarily doing things badly or worse than anybody else. It's just Deloitte is in the magic quadrant for Gartner. It's one of those best in class in terms of cybersecurity companies, and they end up in situations where their VPN usernames and passwords leak on to Pastebin. This seems to be some sort of external consultant maybe that is sharing information with somebody else about how to log in and where to log in with valid usernames and passwords. So having control of how the data is used is crucially important. This is another really good example of like human error, especially with new people. You don't really realize what you're looking at or what you have in your background when you're doing things. So on the picture on the left, you see this guy given an interview with the internet access username and password in the background. On the picture on the right is a interesting case study for those of you who are hiring social media interns. Now, the British Milk Council decided that they were going to fire this guy called Jason that was doing their social media. But before they managed to, or they did that before they changed the password or logged him out from their social media accounts. And then the rest of the world could quite happily follow along as Jason and the British Milk Council had this somewhat heated debate on their Twitter wall about whether or not he should log out from his account. The point here is that a lot of the security controls that we have in place do not account for like human error or forgetting to do user administration. So it's also about having repeatable processes and utilizing automation as much as possible. And why does it matter that you do this right? So this is a sort or a chart of total number of breaches that are affecting US customers on the way up to 2020. And one breach can have thousands, if not millions, of records in it. And once a breach or a leak happens, the accounts or the user accounts are tried within a week. So let's say somebody from Nordea is using their work email to log into a dating site, and then that dating site gets compromised. Now the attackers have a valid Nordea email, and in the worst case, they might have a valid Nordea password as well. A lot of people reuse passwords and reuse user accounts. Some people use their work email for their personal accounts, and this cross-contamination then compromises both the personal aspects as well as the company assets that they're utilizing for. And this leads to insider threat actually being probably over-reported, because for all intents and purposes, if somebody gets a hold of your username and password, then from the company's point of view, it's you that are doing the things in the company's systems. And it might be really hard to prove that it wasn't really you who did these things unless you have an alibi or happen to like actually record everything you did. And over a third of companies in 2018 actually had malicious insiders or issues with malicious insiders. And the thing is that the cost of malicious insiders is huge. The average cost in 2019 was 1,621,000-ish. It's probably a bit less in the Nordics. I couldn't find any meaningful statistics on it, but even if you don't account for intellectual property losses or damage caused by an intellectual or a malicious insider, you might have to account for something like GDPR fines or hit to your reputation. So there's a lot that needs to be considered when you're looking at these types of things. Fortunately, not everything is a problem for everyone. Most companies don't need to worry about nation states. Most companies just need to get their IT hygiene in check, and they need to have a big enough umbrella to protect what's important, understand what their critical services are, and how to protect those critical services, and then focus the limited resources on making sure that remains safe or secure. It's easy to say, but it's really hard to do. A lot of companies do things out of compliance or regulatory pressure without really understanding how they could benefit from it. Some companies have spent a significant amount of money on backups, for instance, but they never tried how to get back from those backups. So like checking, testing, trying and retesting, revalidating makes a lot of sense. I've talked somewhat about deception. I've talked somewhat about how you can benefit from trying to think in terms of an attacker, how to stop things from happening when it happens. The good news is that an attacker needs to go through what's being commonly referred to as the Lockheed Martin kill chain, or the attacker's kill chain. In terms of cybersecurity, that means that they need to do recon, they need to weaponize whatever vulnerabilities they find, then they need to deliver the payload. The payload needs to do exploitation on the vulnerability, which needs to install software or code to run on the system. It needs to have a command channel, and only after all of those steps are they able to actively act on the system. This, for us as defenders, gives us an opportunity to make it harder for the attackers at every point of the way. So when they're doing recon, we can lie to them. When they're weaponizing the vulnerabilities, we can misdirect them. We can have them weaponize the wrong things. When they're delivering the payload, we can divert it to somewhere that doesn't cause us damage. When they're exploiting the vulnerabilities, we can deceive the successes for them. When they're installing software, we can obfuscate where it's installed. When they're doing command and control channels, we can disrupt the communication. We can slow it down. We can make it harder for them to do. And then when they're doing the actions, when they're actively exploiting things, we can make sure that it takes as long as possible for them. And by doing that, we can make sure that it's more expensive for the attacker and it's cheaper for us to do defense. Thank you. That was my presentation. I hope you have some questions. I hope you learned something, or at least enjoyed relearning things you already knew. If there's something in the chat, I would love to take it.
Hi, Benjamin. Thanks. I think I have a question, and you've probably gone over this already, but what is the #1 advice you would give for avoiding cybercrime this summer? And you've given a few examples, but is there one thing that listeners should really think about?
Trust your gut. I'm not going to give a technical answer. I'm just going to say trust your gut. So if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Or if something seems fishy, it probably is. So like trust your instincts and like verify information. So if something comes from a source that you trust but seems odd, then just give them a call and ask, was this really sent by you? Was this really something that you want me to do?
Sounds good. And another one, you mentioned about work emails perhaps being used in settings that aren't work. Are there fast rules we could say about work emails? As in the obvious one, it really is just for work, or is there an easy takeaway?
Yeah, I think there's two. Like, don't mix your work email with your private stuff, and try to keep those segregated. But also, don't mix your private stuff with your work. So like, if you get summer interns coming in, if you get new people coming in, just have a policy in place where you go, like, if you want to use social media, if you want to do these things that you do normally during work, then use your personal devices for it. Don't use company devices for like things that are not related to like doing the things that you should be doing with them.
Do you think that includes, subscriptions for newspapers or something you might read through work, but essentially, I don't know. I suppose that's a bit of a grey area, if you know what I mean. If you subscribe to a particular, online magazine or something that you might argue you need it to read for work.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, reading an online magazine without signing in or using your personal credentials for it isn't necessarily a problem. I think most magazines allow for company-wide subscriptions. So if it's needed for work, maybe you could get a company-wide subscription and then just have everybody from your work have access to the setup without having to log in. Like, there's ways of doing it securely, and there's ways of like achieving what you want to do without compromising the integrity of your account.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks, Benjamin. That was a really, really interesting session, and thanks for spending your time with us. And I hope everyone out there listening has had a good time this morning. And I will, we will upload the recording to insights.nordea.com, so you can share it with your colleagues if you would like to. And we wish you all a great day.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye.
Benjamin. Bye, everyone.